Hi, my name is Traci Parks. I am a commercial photographer here in Columbus, Ohio. And today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my business and do a little bit of setup for you on a shot that I'm going to be doing for myself, not really for a client. I am self-employed full-time as a commercial photographer, and I specialize in architectural photography. I photograph buildings for architects, engineers, and construction companies, and then they use those in their portfolio to persuade clients that they are a good choice to hire. The thing that is very unique about me and my business is that I'm legally blind. You can't tell by looking at me. Legally blind means that even with my contacts in, I can't see very well. There is no surgery at this point to correct my vision. I was born visually impaired and went through school sitting in the first row of the classroom, not being able to see the board anyway. What you can see from about 20 feet away, I can't see unless I'm only about a foot away. That means I see color, texture, pattern, and shape. And that's what architecture is. So that's why I photograph architecture primarily. I went to the Ohio Institute of Photography after getting out of the hospital. I found my career in an unusual way. I had a job, graduated from a four-year college, and was very unhappy. I thought it was my dream job, and I ended up hating it. Unfortunately, I became severely depressed to the point of being suicidal for close to an entire year. I went into the hospital, got out 5 days later, and I wasn't ready to go back to work. I was terrified that people were going to make fun of me or just look at me strangely. So I bought a camera to do something while I was off and recuperating. And I fell in love with it the very first photo I ever took. And that's what sent me to photography school, and here I am years later. My vision is deteriorating. I have what's called degenerative myopia. It simply means I can't see very far. A normal eye, your eyes, are shaped round like a softball, and mine is shaped very oblong like a football. There are two things that have to happen for a person to be able to see. The first is that light has to enter the eye and be focused on the back of the eye, which is the retina. So I wear contacts, and my contacts do that. The retina is the back of the eye, and if you think of it as a projection screen, it might be easier. The second thing that has to happen after the light gets to the back of your eye is that there are nerve cells in your retina, and those nerve cells interpret what you're seeing. I had an optical hemorrhage while I was driving one day, and I've had so many hemorrhages that now my projection screen has holes in it all over. And if you get enough holes in a screen, even though there's an image on it, you won't be able to tell what it is. And so that's how I see. I see things as being blurry. And blur is literally pieces of the picture are missing. I do architecture, but I also do some fine art photography. And I think that my visual impairment actually makes me a better photographer, because I have to work so hard to interpret what I'm seeing. So little things catch my eye, and then I have to go investigate what it is that I'm seeing. It can be a shadow or a shape. And one day I was at Skyline Chili with my photography instructor, and behind him was a door, and I couldn't figure out why there was a red moose painted on the door. And I was staring at it, and Doug finally looked at me and he said, what are you trying to see? And I said, I'm trying to figure out why there's a red moose on that door. And he turned around and he started laughing. He said, that's a Christmas bow. All I could see were the outlines of the bow, which were big antlers, and then the strings of the bow were blurred together to make one round oblong shape, and it looked like Bullwinkle. So that's kind of how I see things. Today I'm working on a project for my own portfolio. These are glass bottles that I have collected over the years. And there's nothing really unique about them except the shadows of them caught my eye one day. And they all have very unique colors and shapes to them. And so what I want to do as the sun comes around to the west, it'll pull the shadows up on this board. And I'm going to actually photograph this upside down. And what I will do is take a picture of just the shadows of the bottles. The camera that I'm using is a medium format camera. In photography, you may know there are several types of film and camera formats. This is a medium format camera. The medium format camera has a larger negative for you to look at, and the advantage is that it blows up to much bigger, clearer enlargements. This is an autofocus medium format camera. They've just started making those, so I can use this because it is autofocus. The large format camera that I have, I do for all of my architectural shots, and hopefully you'll get to see some of that later. That camera is all manual focus. I can focus on the texture of a building and the shape of a building, and sometimes when it's difficult, I have my assistant shine a pen light, flashlight, right back at the lens. And I can then tell whether it's in focus. If it's a big ball of light, I know that it's out of focus. And when it's the smallest speck of light, then I know that it's in focus. If we're shooting in an interior that's very dark, sometimes we'll put a straight back chair or something that has right angles into the picture, throw a light on it, one of the studio lights here, and I can focus on that and then remove that from the picture. So that's how I'm able to actually work with focusing the camera. I love this though because it is autofocus. It makes me a little bit more comfortable, and it allows me to really focus on what I'm doing here. I'm using color negative film. I work with color negative film because I find it easier. The exposure is a little more forgiving, and people usually want to buy prints of fine art photos, so it's easier not to have to worry about translating it later. One of the things that I'm going to do to make my picture a little more interesting and fun, I'm going to do several variations. The shadows would be on a blank board, will be one variation. This board was painted with gold paint underneath and white paint on top, and it's a specialty item that you can get at a home goods store. It's called crackle paint. So it actually looks like the board is crackled, and I think it might be interesting to have just a little bit of texture to make the picture a little more interesting, because you will see quite a bit of the white board. One of the other variations that I plan to do is that when my shadows get to where I want them on the board, the plain white board, I'm going to take a glitter pen, glitter glue, which you can buy at any drugstore, and outline the shapes of them so that it kind of sparkles and adds a little bit. Got red for my red bottle and blue for my blue bottle and green, and I'll use silver for the clear bottle. So that'll be kind of interesting. I'll have to work very quickly as the sun moves, but I think it'll be an interesting variation. I will also be using a 35mm camera with a zoom lens on it. And what I'd like to do, as it gets a little later in the afternoon and the sun goes down a bit and there is less light, I want to take a picture, and while I'm taking the picture, I will move the camera in and out. So as I'm taking the picture, I will actually zoom in and out, and it'll make the bottles look like they're moving. It'll have lines of movement toward the camera. It'll make it, again, just an interesting variation. I have formal photography training, and I made a conscious choice to go back to school. I already had a BA, and I decided to go back to school because I loved it so much. I wanted to condense the learning into 2 years, and I know there are quite a few self-taught photographers, but it's taken them 15 years probably to learn what I learned in 2. So I highly recommend formal training. I think it gives you an edge in several ways. One is that you do have a schedule, and it keeps you on a time frame. You know, I knew that at the end of 2 years I was going to have a formal portfolio. School also gives you, it forces you to learn everything. Even though portrait photography is very difficult for me, I had to take a course in fashion where I was photographing people. And I spent the entire quarter shooting everything over probably 3 and 4 times. But now I know what goes into shooting that kind of thing. You also meet other artists. And I think that's important because every artist has a unique style. And I think it's good to be exposed to that. You learn from other people and get ideas on how to perfect your own style. So I highly recommend a formal education, but there's nothing wrong with being self-taught either. There are lots of great books, and there are lots of people out there who would be willing to help you learn. I think that one of the things that makes me different in my business is obviously that I can't see what I'm doing. So a lot of my pictures are abstract, or they're very detail-oriented. Even though I see only the large blob or large blur, it's always a detail of something, or very often a detail of something that interests me. I could shoot the whole bottle and find a way to do that, but it's the texture and the color of the shadows that fascinate me. So my pictures are very colorful. A lot of them are abstract because I especially enjoy shooting glass objects. The way the light refracts and reflects, I think, is so interesting. I think that it's very important for any artist to realize that you're not only an artist, but that you're a business person. I was very determined to not be in the starving artist category, and I'm very, very proud to say that 6.5 years after I've started my business, I've made a profit every year, and that's unusual. I have an office. I have a business plan. A business plan is a document that you work on, and I think it's important for you to sit down and think about it, especially in photography. Think about what kind of photography are you going to do? Are you going to do only fine art photography? Are you going to do food photography? Are you going to do portraits, fashion, still life, a little bit of everything, advertising? Think about what you're going to shoot. Think about who's going to buy it. If you plan to be a world-famous fine artist, who's going to buy your work? Are they going to be individuals? Are you going to try to sell to galleries? Are you going to try to sell to corporations? And I think that's a lot of that is overlooked. I think we're so focused on creating work that we don't think about making money and being able to make a living. I have the business plan, which tells me that which I've told myself, I'm going to do architecture, I'm going to do fine art for fun, and recently I revised my business plan, and now I'm going to start photographing kids. Not in a formal portrait setting, but in their own backyard with their own toys, so that they're comfortable and so that I can capture their personalities. Have to think about where you're going to sell your work. Are you going to work all over Ohio, all over the United States? Are you going to work just in Columbus? And those are all things that I sat down, especially since I'm visually impaired and have some limitations. I thought it was very important for me to figure out what I wanted to do and how I was going to do it. And I think that is so often overlooked in the art world. I've moved the bottles so that you could see the shadows that I'm intrigued by. And you might have to actually come around behind to see them real clearly. This bottle in particular, just the shape of this bottle kind of fascinated me. And I bought this in a store. I just kind of liked the shape of it. But then one day, when I was sitting against a wall, I noticed this speckled pattern. And this bottle is an old whiskey bottle, and my sister was storing pennies in it. And I thought the shape was interesting, so I had to ask her if I could have it. So she emptied out all of her pennies, which is about $62 worth. And again, I noticed when the light comes through, it does something really different. So I started collecting bottles. This was bought at a garage sale for $1. And I just think the shadow of it is so neat. And this was bought on our honeymoon in Myrtle Beach, and I learned an important lesson. Can't put this in the dishwasher because that color is painted on the outside. So the hot water, luckily I bought 2 bottles. The other one has no color to it now. But there's a leaf on this side, and there are grapes on this side, and depending on which way it faces, you get a more complicated or a simpler shadow. Cobalt blue is one of my favorite colors because it's so rich that I can see that. A lot of the things that I photograph are very simple everyday objects. I photographed a spider web that was growing in the creeping myrtle along the house. I photographed some of the flowers in the butterfly garden last week and did real macro close-ups of them. And people thought that I had been on some exotic trip somewhere, but it was all stuff in my own backyard. And these bottles are things that you can buy at any kind of home goods store, but it's the simple things that fascinate me. And I guess one of the things I like to do is to take a simple object, an everyday object, and turn it into something extraordinary, something that makes you look at it and wonder, where did that come from? Where is that? And so with the bottles, I plan to do that. I do all of my special effects in camera. I don't use a computer at all because a digital image on the computer has to be enlarged so much for me to see it that I'm looking at 2 pixels at a time. So it's very difficult. So all of the photographs that you see of mine or will see have not been manipulated by the computer at all. And I like that. I like being able to say to people, if you had come up and looked through my camera when I was shooting it, that's exactly what you would have seen. The bottles, you can see the shadows are getting a little bit longer as the sun comes around. If I put a piece of white board up here, you'll see the shadows kind of climbing up the board. And that's the effect that I want. When I photograph this, I'll be standing upside down up here on my ladder. And I'll be looking down on top of it with a wide-angle lens. And I will only show the bare minimum of the bottle, just so that you can tell that it is something real that you're looking at, something concrete that you're looking at. I chose to do this outside because sunlight is the brightest light, and to create the shadows, I need that bright light. The bottle, the glass is so thick that a studio light wouldn't do it justice. But you may have noticed that I do have 3 studio lights set up here. This is all equipment that a commercial photographer will have. And what I plan to do, this is a little bit unusual. Most people think of studio equipment being used in the studio, but it doesn't have to be. I will actually turn on my flash unit here. And although you won't be able to see it, later this afternoon when I take the picture, I will flash it. It's called pushing the light. And what I'm doing is using the natural sunlight. And the natural sunlight will highlight the bottom part or maybe the middle part of the bottles. But it'll be a weaker shadow up here at the top of the bottles. So I'll bring my studio light in to throw some more light so that you can actually see the whole outline of the bottle. Very simple shot. I've done some other very simple as far as composition goes. I've done a lot of shots that are compositionally simple, and they always sell. And I think people like me are fascinated by the color and sometimes maybe by the technique. I told you that I was going to outline one of these. I think I'm going to try one here. And you may, oops, oh, okay, it does work. You may wonder again why I'm adding something like this. It's because things that sparkle really capture my attention, and I find it kind of mesmerizing. So this will be kind of just a unique touch. I'll do variations of this. I'll do one that has the sparkle in it, and I'll do one that hasn't. But the sunlight will make it sparkle, and it just will add a little more interest to the photograph, I think. I'll do some with this camera, and because I'm shooting negative film, I don't have to bracket exposure too much. Bracketing is where you shoot one that's a little bit lighter and a little bit darker. And I do have the capability of doing a Polaroid shot. So I will take this back, this film back, and the film I'm using is a Kodak film, and it's VC, means vivid color. And because the color is so important to this shot, that's why I've chosen this film. This shot wouldn't be near as interesting as a black and white shot. So depending on the subject matter, as a professional, you need to decide what kind of film you're going to use. Whether you're going to use slide film. Is the client going to use it for slide shows? Or if it's going to be submitted to a magazine, the slide film is probably what they're going to want. They want the highest quality. And of course, negative film, you have to make a print, and then that print gets scanned, and you lose quality with each generation. But I'm not doing that. I'm doing it just for myself, to sell prints. And what I've started doing recently is selling specialty items. I'm selling tote bags and luggage tags and clipboards and things like that that have my images on them. There are companies that do that. So again, this is one of those images that I think would be kind of fun